That's one way to get me started. Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome back to my Resident Evil um, review series. Today I'll be reviewing the kind of underrated, installment, Resident Evil Afterlife. So my story with Resident Evil Afterlife, this is the last installment of the series that I have like a big amount of nostalgia for. Mainly due to the fact that this was one of only two Resident Evil movies that I've seen in theaters. That's the main reason why I have so much nostalgia for this movie. This is the first one I saw in theaters. And let me tell you something. I was really pleasantly surprised. Hello, Gray. Good little action movie. Yeah. I was really pleasantly surprised when I saw this for the first time. Honestly, I think this movie was marketed terribly because I didn't see a single trailer for this movie until after I saw it in theaters. And even then, I only saw it twice. And unfortunately, I did not see this movie in 3D. I didn't even know that this movie was made in 3D until I saw it on DVD. This was, of course, the first installment. I think it's the only one, too, that was shot in 3D. I could be wrong. The next movie... I think the next movie might have been shot on 3D, but I could be wrong. Hang on, I gotta reply to somebody. Okay. So, I'm gonna jump right into the plot with this one. The plot of Resident Evil Afterlife, I gotta call the timeline into account here. 4 years after the events of Extinction, Alice and her band of clones have decided to take revenge upon Umbrella, and they infiltrate the Umbrella Tokyo branch, kill its snipers on the surface, and they sneak inside and start slaughtering a whole bunch of Umbrella soldiers throughout this giant, massive underground facility in Tokyo. They slay pretty much the entire staff of this branch, except for Albert Wesker, played by Sean Roberts, who manages to kill a couple clones of his own, and he escapes in some type of fancy plane. And apparently it's called a tilt rotator plane. And when he gets inside there, he detonates a massive, what I like to call a fusion reaction hydrogen nuclear bomb. Kind of a mouthful, but it destroys pretty much the entire facility underground, and it leaves behind a massive, like Grand Canyon-sized hole in the ground. However, as Wesker gets away, it turns out the real Alice is on board this tilt rotator plane, and is about to kill Wesker, but in a moment of stupidity, she decides to talk first and shoot later. Wesker injects her with some type of serum that neutralizes the T-virus inside her body, basically rendering her human and stripping her of her powers, unfortunately. However, when Wesker is distracted, the plane crashes alongside the landscape of a mountain. Sorry, that's my friend. And Wesker is seemingly killed, yet somehow Alice survives, even though Wesker is superhuman. and Alice is not, yet she's the one to survive and come away with just a few bumps and bruises and a little dirty. Movie logic. Sorry. 6 months later, Alice has recovered from her injuries and has decided to take a plane and fly to Alaska herself to see if her allies had made it there okay. She shows up to the coordinates for Arcadia, Alaska, and discovers it to be pretty much just like an empty field full of abandoned airplanes, and there's a beach nearby. She finds the umbrella chopper that the group of survivors took at the end of the last movie, but finds it abandoned. Though she notices a figure darting across the way, and it turns out to be Claire, who has some type of robotic spider device attached to her chest. It was injecting her with some type of drug that causes memory loss. In a moment of panic, Claire decided to try to kill her because she doesn't know who Alice is. However, she is knocked out, and Alice takes the thing off and says, "Do you remember me at all? My name is Alice. We met in the Nevada desert 18 months ago." So, the next day, Alice and Claire board her plane and fly along the western seaboard through Vancouver, Seattle, and finally the City of Angels. They find a prison, a massive prison in the middle of LA, to be completely surrounded by thousands and thousands of zombies. They make a crash landing on the very top when they discover that there's some survivors still there. Let's see. Consisting of Luther West, played by Boris Kodjoe, and he is so awesome. Wendell, played by Fulvio Cesare. Crystal Waters, played by Casey Clark. Bennett, played by Kim Coates, the guy who played Tig in Sons of Anarchy. Kim Young, played by Norman Young, and Angel Orditz, played by Sergio Perez Mencheta. With their help, Alice makes landing on the prison's rooftop and learns that that Arcadia isn't actually a like a piece of land in some type of part of the world. It's actually a ship, a cargo tanker to be exact, which is traveling slowly along the western coast. However, the ship hasn't moved in several days. And no one from the ship has responded to the survivors in the prison repeatedly shooting out flares, so it's seemingly desolate. Luther takes Alice inside the prison and gives her a little bit of a grand tour, gives her some food, and Luther takes her after she eats to meet the seemingly the last inmate of this prison, Chris Redfield, played by Wentworth Miller. I swear to God that I thought that dude was the same guy who was in Supernatural. He's not, but Chris Redfield states that he is being wrongfully imprisoned inside this special isolation cell that he is. And he will reveal a route to their escape in exchange for his freedom. The next day, Alice goes to the shower room because they still have running water to wash up, but discovers one of the survivors there peeping on her and holding him at gunpoint. They are quickly attacked by a couple of zombies that manage to burrow their way through dirt and concrete in order to get inside the prison, kills Wendell, who was peeping on Alice, and Alice shoots the remaining two, and they realize that the zombies have burrowed up from the sewer line in order to get inside the prison. So, in an act of desperity, what the, in an act of desperation, Alice convinces Luther to let Chris out, and Chris reveals to the survivors that inside the garage of the prison is a UPV, an urban pacification vehicle. 16 wheel, 10 tons of fun, holds 20 pressurized water cannon. Urban pacification vehicle, indeedy do. Angel and Bennett decide to take a blowtorch to cut through the lock of the garage in order to get inside, and Chris leads Alice and Crystal to the last 2 floors of the prison, which have flooded in, stating that there is an armory down there. They make it there, but Crystal is unfortunately killed by a zombie, but Chris and Alice make it inside the armory, and they recover some guns, ammo, and explosives. They get to the top of the roof of the prison after Bennett and Angel make it their way inside the garage, but they they discover the UPV's engine to be out of the vehicle itself. And they obviously don't have time to put it back in because the undead will eventually get in. And also, not to mention the appearance of the Axeman, a giant 10-foot tall butcher-looking dude with a massive, massive axe. By the way, I forgot to mention, this movie takes elements from Resident Evil 5. Very, very few elements. I think the Axeman and Albert Wesker himself are the only things that they take from the film. Or the game, excuse me. And the Axeman shows up at the prison gates and starts banging on it with his axe, trying to get in. Claire and Luther try to barricade the gate, but the Axeman eventually breaks through, and the survivors make it to the roof. Bennett kills Angel and steals Alice's plane and heads toward the Arcadia. The zombies finally break inside, and they start swarming the survivors on the roof. They try to shoot them away, but there's just way too many. And they make it back down to the shower room in order to go through the tunnels and make it to the sewer system. However, Alice and Claire have a fight with the Axeman. They eventually do end up killing him by... This is genius. Alice earlier in the movie shows that she's been collecting a shit ton of quarters. And when Luther asks her, what would you possibly want with those? All Alice says is, it's a hobby. And when she was fighting against the zombies, when she was trying to get to the shower room, she reveals that she has 2 double-barrel sawed-off elephant shotguns. And when she fires them, it turns out, instead of pellets, she uses quarters. I'm not gonna lie, that is so fucking genius. It's stupid, but it's awesome. And when she fires both of these, it's like shrapnel and pellets with massive spread on steroids. I mean, these quarters go every frickin' where. They just mow down and fuck up a whole bunch of bitches. And they kill the Axeman by shooting him once in the neck, and then shooting him once again in the head, blowing his head off, literally. They make it through the tunnels dug by the zombies. Claire reunites with Chris. Alice makes it to the sewers as well. However, Luther is dragged off by a zombie before he can jump into the sewers. They find a boat and they they head towards the Arcadia, discover the crashed plane, and see that Bennett had made it. They don't find him there, though. And they search through the ship, and they discover that despite it being seemingly abandoned, the ship's system still states that there are 2,185 survivors on board. 2,185 survivors still aboard. They infiltrate the ship, and they discover that it's an umbrella ship, of course. Surprise, surprise. And they're holding the survivors there to experiment on them. Anyway, Alice discovers that Wesker is aboard this ship. T-Virus brought him back from the crash. However, he himself is losing control over his body because the T-Virus is fighting him to take over his body. And he tells her that I thought if I ingested fresh human DNA, I would regain control. But since you are the only one who successfully bonded with the T virus and your DNA is much stronger, I'd like to ingest you to regain control over my body. And all Alice says is, I'm not on the menu. And kicks a table of surgical knives towards Wesker. And Chris and Claire show up and they engage into a short fight with Wesker. Alice fends off two zombie mutant dogs whose heads split apart to reveal nasty, hellish mouths of teeth. She shoots one, and she slices the second in half with a broken piece of glass that's like this big. However, she is stabbed in the arm by Bennett with a surgical scalpel, and right before Wesker is about to eat her, she stabs him in the head with the knife that she was stabbed with, and then shoots him in the mouth through his head with the remaining shotgun, blowing the back of his brains out. Right before he's about to get back up, Chris and Claire show up and they shoot the shit out of him, despite Chris having a machete. A fucking machete. Whatever. Seemingly Wesker is dead. However, they seal Bennett inside the room and Wesker revives and eats Bennett. He escapes in another tilt plane, or what's it called away? A tilt rotator plane, and is about to activate another fusion reaction nuclear hydrogen bomb, but discovers that Alice had planted this bomb inside the plane that he's on, and blows up in a massive explosion. However, apparently it's stated that he parachutes away at the last minute. I didn't see shit. So I guess that's just movie logic retconning. Alice, Claire, and Chris release all the survivors, but you collect what? Yes, I do collect weapons. This is one of very, very many. I think I might actually do a weapons collection video sometime. That's not a bad idea. Anyway, Alice resolves to turn the Arcadia into the actual safe haven that she thought it would be, and broadcasts a new message over the radio transmissions to any other survivors. However, more Umbrella troops show up in a whole bunch of tilt rotator planes to converge upon the Arcadia itself, thus ending the film. Not before we see Luther, turns out to be battered but still breathing, show up in the sewers and shoot a couple zombies that were chasing him, thus ending the movie and leading right into the events in the next film. So how about this plot? Well, it's definitely a lot more simple than the previous installments. That's both a good and bad thing. Even though I don't really get the feeling that this movie was rushed, the plot certainly feels like it was rushed. It takes place, not counting the stuff at the beginning, then we have a time jump of 6 months. This movie takes place over the course of like 3 days. Or no, not necessarily. The main stuff takes place over the course of like 3 days. And this movie is really, really fast-paced. So with that being said, let me get into the pros. Like I said, this movie has very, very fast pacing. There's not really any moment that slows down and allows people... Well, okay, that's not entirely true. The stuff when we first get to the prison, that's kind of the only moment where the film slows down and allows people to just take in their new surroundings at the prison. But it only lasts like 6 minutes, so it's not insanely long. But other than that, this movie is very, very quickly paced. Not really a bad thing, but it's just that it doesn't work well because this movie is labeled as a partial horror film. I call bullshit. This movie is just a high-octane action movie. And while fast pacing certainly works for an action movie, this movie is also trying to be a horror film, and fast pacing works horrendously for horror films. Even though I've stated that I don't like slow burn horror films, I also don't like horror films that have an insanely fast pace, because I just kind of feel like the movie just rushes to get through the film just to get to the good stuff. This really suffers in Friday the 13th films. But overall, you can never really say that this movie is slowly paced. It feels like it drags on for an eternity. Special effects in this movie are also pretty good. I wouldn't say they're great, unfortunately, because this is when they started to use CG a lot more. Well, granted, it still looks... The CG itself looks really good, but I'm missing the practical stuff. Like, there's no real... Okay, the Axeman, I do believe, was a hybrid of practical and CG effects. I also think they use composite shots because, like I said, the Axeman is like 10 feet tall, so there's a noticeable difference in between the two, especially due to the fact that Ali Larder, I think she's only like 5'6" or 5'7", so there is a noticeable difference in height. And they did a good job of making the Axeman look big. And I always do respect when you have two characters in the same room and one is clearly taller than the other and they manage to pull it off well. Like, I highly doubt the dudes who played the Axemen were actually that tall. If they did, they're probably the biggest dudes I've ever seen in my life, and I'm amazed they're still alive. But, speaking of which, the Axeman, like I said, the reason I say it's a mix of practical and CG is that there's a lot of nasty blood stains all over him, and I believe his axe itself was CG. I wouldn't be surprised if the dude was actually just holding a big pole that had a CGI axe head on it, because the thing just looks insanely huge, and it looks insanely heavy too. But overall, the Axeman looks pretty good. It's definitely a dude with makeup with CGI enhancements. That looks great. And the zombies, kind of what little of them that we do see, they are still made up with dudes in makeup, but these type of zombies, they have like a 4-pronged tongue that comes out of their mouth. That's obviously CG. It's very noticeably CG, but it doesn't look bad. I've seen worse. But the zombies aren't bad. They're just kind of okay. They're still dudes in suits, but they also do use a lot of CG models to portray the zombies, which, with the amount of zombies that are in this movie, it does make sense. So at least they're trying to be smart with their CG and not stupid. But when there's 1 or 2 or 3 zombies, it is actual dudes in makeup and rotten clothes. Not literally, but you know what I mean. As for the zombie dogs, at first they were actual made up dogs in makeup and prosthetic suits, but when their heads split open and they open up in the mouths, obviously they're CG. Unless there are practical effects, and in that case, they're some of the greatest practical effects I've ever seen. But yeah, those are obvious CG models, and those look kind of decent. They certainly don't look... They're obviously CG, but they're nowhere near as bad as the CG models used for the liquor in Resident Evil 1, and they certainly don't look cartoonish. The action scenes in this movie are also pretty fun. They're very well shot. There's a lot of use of slow-mo. Like, one example of right before Alice uses her twin quarter-shooting shotguns, there's a scene where she's running through the zombies with 2 .357 Magnums. She's running along slowly, and she shoots as she goes. By the way, this movie does kind of rip off The Matrix and the fact that they use bullet speed. But I'll get to that when I talk about Wesker. But actually, it is kind of cool, and it definitely does lend to the 3D aspect, which, again, I didn't notice that this movie was in 3D when I first saw it, because I saw it in 2D. I didn't even know it was supposed to be in 3D, but it definitely looked cool. And I think these are probably the best shot action scenes in this entire series. Though it's got some debate with the next movie, despite that movie's flaws. Well, yeah, the action scenes are still very, very well done. Excellent use of slow-mo, excellent use of prototype gun fu. This was before John Wick. Funny enough, I still have not seen any of the John Wick movies. I've heard they're good, though. But overall, the action scenes are fun. The soundtrack to this movie is also really, really good. It's a completely original soundtrack. There's no reused clips from the previous film, but I think they stopped using that for the rest of the series, using recycled clips. This has my favorite soundtrack in the entire series, surprisingly. There's a lot of techno rock themes throughout the film that are really, really good, and it adds to the movie's epic sort of epic feel, and it definitely adds to the action scenes, too. Just makes them feel more exciting and more badass. The soundtrack in this movie is really, really good. And also, this movie has really beautiful cinematography. Actually, no. I think in some ways it's as good or a little better than the previous film. There's a lot of really wide open shots that show off a lot of the landscape. When Alice first shows up at the City of Angels, it's a really, really big, wide open shot where you just see the entire city almost burning to the ground. There's smoke billowing out everywhere. There's buildings in shambles all over the place. There's fires sprouting all over. It looks like hell. It looks like absolute hell. I can't even imagine how much it must smell and how smoggy, more than usual, it must be. But that shot really is good. And this movie really does have a lot of beautiful cinematography. And it's very pleasant to look at. Also, one little side note, I forgot to mention the special effects. This movie has really good production values. The sets used inside the prison look really good. I'm not sure if they shot inside of an actual prison or if it was just some kind of set. But it looks really good. It looks dark and gritty and grungy. The set that they used for the Arcadia, while I'm pretty sure it was both a set and green screen effects, they still look good. There's a lot of absolute pure white, sterile backgrounds used for the inside of the Arcadia when they finally get inside the Umbrella facility. And it's very, very pleasant to look at. It certainly is very bright. No, you're not late, Omega Picture. I still got some stuff to talk about. Speaking of which, let's get into the cons of this film. Con number one, aside from Alice and kind of Claire, and Luther, this movie's characters are kind of bland. This is the first time in the series that I can legitimately say that the characters really aren't anything special. A lot of them are just cannon fodder to be killed off, and you got to have the obligatory backstabber character that just turns out to be a complete total douche. That being Bennett, of course. Luther, though, like I said, he is a lot of fun. He has a lot of personality to him. He's a little bit gangster, but it's in the fun way. He doesn't act like a gangster or a hood rat or anything, even though he kind of dresses like one. He has a fun personality, and he is also a little bit of a badass. He's good with a gun, and he's very athletic, too, because there's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. It's really, really quick. But when Alice makes her crash landing on the roof, the plane itself, despite it being snagged by a cable, it almost goes over the edge of the roof. However, Luther comes up and jumps high. This dude was a basketball player, and basketball players know how to jump high. He jumps like 8 feet in the air, grabs onto the tail of the plane, and hauls it to the ground. Another excellent use of slow motion. So he's cool. And Alice, she has a lot more to say in this movie than the previous film. And she still is kind of a badass, but I definitely feel the effects of her being depowered. She relies a lot more on her weapons this time, which isn't really a bad thing, but why did she have to be depowered? Why? It's just kind of a pet peeve of mine. I really wish she wasn't depowered, because it just makes it too easy for the villains of this movie to beat her ass, especially in the next movie. Oh my god, especially in the next movie. But this movie sets the seeds of that bullshit, unfortunately. Outside of that, the characters are just kind of bland. There's not really much to say about them. They're just there to progress the plot and fill up the cast. Albert Wesker is a Matrix ripoff. I'm not even joking. Granted, he was this way in Resident Evil 5 as well. Yes, I have watched the anime movies. I own all three of them. I will not be reviewing them as part of this Resident Evil series. I'm going to review those a little later down the line. But I have seen them. I own all three, and I really like all of them, especially the first one. But yeah, Wesker is a Matrix ripoff, and he was that way in Resident Evil 5 as well. And even there, I didn't like it because I just kind of, really, why you gotta rip off the Matrix? I've never played any of, actually no, yes I have, but they're really short. I've played some of the video games, but I kind of stopped after Resident Evil 5 because I think at that point the timeline was just getting too nuts. So that answers your question. So if that answers your question, there you go. And also Wesker himself is not, he's kind of a bland villain as well. He doesn't have, he has a little bit of threatening presence, but that's just only because he's a T-virus infected Matrix ripoff. But outside of that, the guy who plays him, he's very, very bland in his performance. He's like poor man's Keanu Reeves. He just stands there or sits there with his shades on. He doesn't emote in his face whatsoever. He's just granted he has a shit-eating grin on his face from time to time, but outside of that, Wesker, he's nowhere near as threatening or as charismatic as he is in the video games. Also, the characters in this movie do some really, really stupid fucking things. To name the three examples off the top of my head I could think of. When Alice faces Wesker at the beginning of the film, she comes up behind him and says to Wesker, "Any last words?" And then he's able to reach around and stab her in the neck with the serum. Why don't you just shoot him and just get it over with? You would have been much better off. Another example. This drives me nuts. And they both have to do with bladed weapons. When Chris and Alice are finding the armory at the bottom of the prison, not only does she have her two double-barrel shotguns, but she also has a wakizaki, which is basically like a medium-sized katana. She pulls that out, and when a zombie shows up, she stabs it through the head, but lets the katana fall along with the dead body. Why? Why didn't you just pull it out and actually keep it and use it as a weapon later? This may seem like a pet peeve, but something like that really drives me nuts because that would have helped you out a lot later in the film, dealing with the zombie dogs and dealing with Wesker. If you had kept that katana, you would have been much better off. But no, she stabs it through a zombie's mouth, and she has her Kukri blades. Why doesn't she have those on her? You see them in one scene earlier in the film, but she doesn't put them on her. She doesn't use them at all. She uses her wakizaki once and then lets it fall with the zombie body, doesn't collect it, and that empty sheath is on her back for the rest of the movie. It's like a big giant tease whenever I see it. Ugh. And in the final scene when Chris and Claire fight Wesker, Chris has a fucking machete. A fucking machete on his back. And he never uses it once. Instead of shooting this shit out of him after Alice blows his brains out, why doesn't Chris take out the machete and just chop his head off? It would have saved you guys a lot more trouble, specifically in Resident Evil 6. He's kind of an ally in the next movie, but whatever. That's another one of my flaws with the next film. Just take off the machete and cut his goddamn head off. How hard is that? But no. And it's also a waste of bullets, yes. Why shoot the shit out of him when that's not going to do a damn thing? And speaking of which, my last con with this movie is Chris Redfield. He is nothing like he was in the video games. In the games, he was a very strong, very smart, very charismatic, and just a badass of a dude. He was very no-nonsense. He was straight to the point. he knew how to kick ass and he knew how to kill zombies. In this movie, this doesn't feel like the Resident Evil Chris Redfield. It just feels like random ass supernatural looking Chris Redfield. And I say supernatural in reference to the TV show. Chris Redfield in this movie sucks. And it's a shame because Chris Redfield is one of my favorite Resident Evil characters, in the video games at least. I can't stand Chris in this movie. Such a wasted opportunity. I think it's almost a bit of a for the better that this is the only movie that he's in. But that leads into another issue that I have, is that this is the only time Chris Redfield appears in the entire fucking series. But I got some big problems with the next movie for that kind of bullshit, but I'll save that for the next film. So with all that said, despite all my issues with this movie, I would definitely say this is probably my third favorite of the series. I have some nostalgic memories for it, and I do enjoy popping it in every once in a while and just enjoying an entertaining Resident Evil film. I'm going to give this one an 8.5 out of 10. It's definitely got some problems, but I still do enjoy this movie. It's a very solid fourth entry. Oh boy. And hope you join me tomorrow as I take apart the last, well, not in one video, but the last two installments, and boy, especially with the sixth film, I'm going to have a rough time. And join me next time when I review the fifth installment, Resident Evil Retribution. Post your comments down below, let me know what you think. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share this video with your friends. Thank you to all those who showed up and said hello. I will see you in the next one, and have a good night.